The silence inside the marble mansion had never felt this heavy. Katherine stood in front of her husband, Jonathan Donovan, her eyes filled with unshed tears. His expression was cold, distant, like he was closing a business deal, not ending a 10-year marriage. She searched his face, desperate to find a trace of the man she had built a life with. But all she saw was indifference. That same calculating stare he used in boardrooms, sealing million-dollar contracts, was now directed at her. "Are you serious?" Her voice trembled, but Jonathan simply adjusted the cuffs of his expensive shirt and nodded. "The lawyers are already handling everything. You'll get enough to start over. There's no need for drama, Katherine." That sentence cut deeper than she expected. Start over? As if it were that simple. She had been by his side through every struggle, every step of his rise to power. She had sacrificed her career, her dreams, everything, to be the perfect wife. And now he was discarding her like an outdated piece of furniture. She already knew. She had felt the distance growing over the past few months. The lingering scent of a woman's perfume on his shirts. The business trips that became more frequent. But nothing could have prepared her for the sight of Olivia standing in the doorway. Jonathan's mistress leaned casually against the frame, arms crossed, a smug smirk playing on her lips. She wore a sleek black dress that hugged her curves, as if this moment were her personal victory parade. "I hope you don't take this the wrong way, Katherine," Olivia said, stepping into the room with the ease of someone who knew she had already won. "But Jonathan deserves someone who truly understands him." Katherine's blood turned to ice. The audacity of this woman was suffocating. She wanted to scream, to lash out, to ask Jonathan how he could be so cruel. But instead, she took a slow breath and lifted her chin. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her fall apart. "I hope you two are very happy, Jonathan," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. Without another word, she grabbed her purse and walked out of the mansion, refusing to look back. But the moment she stepped through the massive iron gates, the weight of reality came crashing down. She was alone. The cold night air stung her skin, but it wasn't nearly as painful as the betrayal. What was she supposed to do now? Where would she go? Katherine thought this was the worst night of her life. Little did she know, it was only the beginning of something much bigger. The taxi ride away from the mansion felt endless. Katherine sat motionless in the back seat, her hands clenched in her lap, her breathing shallow. She stared out the window, watching as the glittering city lights blurred together, turning into streaks of neon against the dark skyline. Just hours ago, she had been a wife, a partner, the woman standing beside one of the most powerful men in the city. Now she was no one, a discarded memory, a chapter Jonathan had decided to close without a second thought. Her phone buzzed in her coat pocket, and for a fleeting moment, her heart jumped. Maybe it was him. Maybe he had realized what a mistake he had made. Maybe he still loved her. With trembling hands, she pulled out the device. But when she looked at the screen, reality crashed down on her like a cruel joke. No calls, no messages, nothing. The only notification was an automated email confirming her upcoming divorce proceedings. Her stomach twisted. Jonathan hadn't even waited a full day before making it official. The driver's voice pulled her back to the present. "Where to, ma'am?" She hesitated, her throat tightening. Where was she supposed to go? The mansion was no longer her home. She had no immediate family nearby. Her parents had retired to Florida years ago, and her only sibling, Matt, was stationed overseas with the military. Most of the so-called friends she had made in Jonathan's world weren't actually hers. They were people who only saw her as an extension of him. And now that he was gone, so were they. Swallowing hard, she whispered an address. 57th and Oakwood. The Lexington Apartments. It had been years since she had last been there, but she knew Rachel would answer. Rachel always answered. When the cab pulled up to the modest apartment building, Katherine hesitated before stepping out. The place was nothing like the mansion she had just left. It was older, smaller, with a few cracks in the brickwork and a faint smell of rain lingering in the air. But it felt real, felt safe. Gathering what little courage she had left, she grabbed her suitcase and made her way to the third floor. The door swung open almost immediately after she knocked. Rachel stood there in sweatpants and an oversized t-shirt, her brown curls a mess, a half-eaten bowl of cereal in her hand. At first, she blinked in confusion. Then her gaze dropped to Katherine's suitcase, and the look on her face shifted to pure rage. "Tell me that bastard didn't do what I think he did." Katherine tried to answer, but her voice failed her. Her chest tightened, her vision blurred, and suddenly, the tears she had been holding back spilled over. The weight of the entire night came crashing down, and she barely managed to choke out, "He left me." For her, Rachel didn't hesitate. She set the bowl down on a side table and pulled Katherine into the kind of hug that said, "You are not alone in this. That son of a bitch. I swear, if I ever see him." She didn't finish the sentence, but Katherine could hear the fury in her voice. For the first time that night, she allowed herself to collapse into someone's arms. But beneath the grief, beneath the humiliation, something else stirred deep inside her, a quiet ember of resolve. Jonathan had taken everything from her, but she would not stay broken forever. Morning light filtered through the thin curtains of Rachel's apartment, painting the small living room in muted shades of gold. Katherine sat curled up on the couch, wrapped in a thick gray blanket, a half-empty cup of coffee growing cold in her trembling hands. The night had been long. Sleep had come in fleeting moments, interrupted by flashes of Jonathan's face. His cold, detached expression, the way he had dismissed her as if their years together had meant nothing. Every time she thought about it, a fresh wave of pain surged through her chest. Rachel shuffled into the room, still in her pajama shorts and oversized sweater, her hair in a messy bun. She carried a second cup of coffee, setting it on the table before plopping down into the armchair across from Katherine. For a long moment, she just studied her, lips pressed together, eyes sharp with concern. Then, finally, she sighed and leaned forward. "Okay, no more sulking. What's the plan?" Katherine let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Plan? I don't have one, Rachel." She set her cup down, rubbing her temples as if that could stop the pounding headache forming behind her eyes. "I don't have a job. I don't have a home. Hell, I don't even know who I am without him." The words tasted bitter on her tongue, and she hated how weak they made her sound. But it was the truth. For a decade, she had existed in Jonathan's shadow, molding herself into the perfect wife, the perfect partner. And now, she was just lost. Rachel scoffed, shaking her head. "Oh, please, you're acting like he took your soul along with the mansion." She sat up straighter, pointing a finger at her. "Listen to me, Kat. You are not some helpless victim in all of this. Jonathan may have stripped you of a lot, but you are still you. And I refuse to sit here and let you act like your life is over just because some rich asshole decided to replace you." Katherine swallowed hard, her throat tightening. "It's not that simple, Rachel. He controlled everything. The house, the finances, my entire damn life. You have no idea what it's like to wake up one day and realize you have nothing left." Her voice cracked on the last words, and she hated the vulnerability in it. Rachel's expression softened, but there was still fire in her eyes. "You have me, and you have yourself. And believe me, that's more than enough." She exhaled, rubbing her forehead before fixing Katherine with a determined look. "All right, let's talk about the divorce settlement. What did you get?" Katherine let out a slow breath. "Some money. Enough to survive for a while, but not enough to rebuild my life comfortably. The house? Gone. Our savings? Mostly tied up in his assets. The lawyers made sure I got the bare minimum." She clenched her jaw, her hands curling into fists. "Jonathan knew exactly how to cut me off without making it look cruel on paper." Rachel rolled her eyes, muttering a curse. "Of course he did. That man doesn't just throw people away. He burns the bridge behind them so they can never come back." She sat forward, a dangerous smirk forming on her lips. "But you're not going to let him win." Katherine blinked, something shifting inside her. A quiet ember of anger, of defiance. She had been so consumed by the pain, by the loss, that she hadn't even considered another possibility. What if this wasn't the end? What if this was just the beginning? Katherine sat motionless, her fingers tightening around the ceramic mug as Rachel's words echoed in her mind. "You're not going to let him win." The sentence lingered, pressing against her like a weight she wasn't sure she could carry. She had spent the last 12 hours drowning in the reality of her situation, mourning the life that had been ripped away from her. But what if this wasn't just an ending? What if this was the first step toward something she had never allowed herself to imagine? She exhaled slowly and set her coffee down, rubbing her temples. "All right, let's say you're right," she murmured, her voice quieter than she intended. "Let's say I fight back. Where do I even start?" Rachel leaned forward, a knowing smirk playing on her lips. "Now that is the right question." She tapped her fingers against the armrest of her chair, eyes narrowing in thought. "First things first, you need a job. Something stable, something that gives you back a sense of control." Katherine let out a dry laugh. "Rachel, I haven't worked in over a decade. What company is going to look at my resume and see anything other than rich man's wife?" The words felt bitter on her tongue, but she couldn't ignore the truth in them. Jonathan hadn't just left her without a home. He had left her without an identity. Rachel waved a dismissive hand. "Please, skills don't just vanish. You worked in marketing before Jonathan, right?" Katherine hesitated, her stomach twisting. She had. Right out of college, she had landed a position at a mid-sized agency, climbing her way up until she was handling major accounts. She had been ambitious, independent, driven, until Jonathan convinced her to give it all up. "You don't need to work, Katherine. I can take care of us. Focus on us, on our future." At the time, it had sounded like love. Now, she saw it for what it really was, a slow, calculated erasure of who she had been before him. She swallowed hard. "I worked in marketing for a few years, but that was before Jonathan." "Before?" She trailed off, shaking her head. "It's been too long." Rachel arched an eyebrow. "So what? You think the entire industry has magically changed overnight? Listen, you've got experience, you've got intelligence, and you've got me. And lucky for you, I know someone who runs a PR firm downtown. He's always looking for fresh talent. I can get you a meeting." Katherine blinked, a strange mix of gratitude and fear swelling in her chest. "You'd do that for me?" Rachel scoffed. "Katherine, I would burn Jonathan's entire empire to the ground if I could. Getting you a job is the least I can do." Katherine let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She was terrified of rejection, of failure, of stepping into a world she had left behind so long ago. But beneath all that fear, something else stirred. It was small, fragile, but undeniable. Hope. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't thinking about Jonathan. She was thinking about herself. And maybe, just maybe, she was about to discover who she really was. The city stretched before Katherine as she sat in the back of a taxi, the towering skyline a stark contrast to the suffocating familiarity of Jonathan's world. The streets pulsed with life, businessmen rushing between meetings, coffee-fueled interns clutching their laptops, yellow cabs honking impatiently. It had been years since she had been part of this rhythm. Years since she had been anything other than Jonathan Donovan's wife. Rachel had spent the entire morning coaching her, pushing her, refusing to let her back out. They had updated her resume, gone over potential interview questions, even picked out the perfect outfit, Rachel's tailored navy blazer and a sleek white blouse. Now, sitting there with her portfolio clenched in her lap, Katherine wasn't sure if she was ready or if she was about to fall apart. The taxi pulled up in front of Halston and More PR, a towering glass structure that gleamed under the morning sun. Katherine hesitated before stepping out, her stomach twisting into knots. The revolving doors reflected a version of herself she barely recognized. A woman standing alone, stripped of the wealth and security that had once defined her. She swallowed hard. "I can do this. I have to do this." Inside, the receptionist greeted her politely and led her to a conference room on the 15th floor. The space was modern and minimalist, with floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing a breathtaking view of the city. But Katherine barely noticed. She sat stiffly in the sleek leather chair, her palms damp, her pulse hammering in her ears. Minutes stretched unbearably long. She checked the time on her phone. debating whether she should leave before embarrassing herself. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe she was kidding herself thinking she could start over. But before she could act on that thought, the door swung open, and a tall man in a tailored suit stepped inside, his expression shifting from polite professionalism to mild surprise. Katherine Hayes. Wow, I wasn't expecting to see you again. Her breath caught. Nathan Carlisle. She hadn't heard that name in years, but she knew the face instantly. Back when she had worked in marketing, he had been a major client, sharp, ambitious, and respected in the industry. They had collaborated on several projects, and he had always been straightforward, someone who valued results over appearances. But what did he see when he looked at her now? Nathan pulled out a chair across from her, flipping through the resume she had worked so hard to perfect. Rachel told me you were looking to get back into the game. Can't lie, I was surprised. Katherine forced a small smile, though her hands clenched in her lap beneath the table. That's one way to put it. Nathan leaned back, tapping a pen against the table thoughtfully. Look, I won't waste your time. I remember your work. You had talent, drive, creativity. But this industry has only gotten tougher. It's high stakes, high pressure. I need to know, are you really ready for that? Katherine inhaled sharply. She could feel the weight of her past pressing against her, whispering doubts into her ear. You've been out too long. You're not the same woman you used to be. But another voice, one she hadn't heard in years, pushed back. You have nothing to lose, and everything to prove. She met Nathan's gaze, her voice steady, unwavering. I don't just want this job, Nathan. I need it. And I promise you, I will work harder than anyone in this building. A slow smile crossed Nathan's face, like he had just found something unexpected. All right then, let's see what you've got. For the first time in a long time, Katherine wasn't looking back. She was moving forward. The elevator doors slid open with a quiet chime, revealing the fast-paced world of Halston and more PR. Katherine stepped out, her heels clicking against the polished tile floor as she followed Nathan down a long hallway lined with glass-walled offices. The buzz of the workplace surrounded her. Phones ringing, voices overlapping, the frantic tapping of keyboards. The energy was intoxicating, but also intimidating. It had been over a decade since she had last stood in a professional environment like this. Back then, she had been a rising star in marketing, full of ambition, eager to prove herself. And then Jonathan happened. He had convinced her that she didn't need a career, that his success was their success, that her role as his wife was more important than any title she could earn on her own. And now she was here, alone, starting over. Nathan glanced at her as they approached the main office floor. PR is fast-paced, unpredictable, and cutthroat, he said, his voice casual but firm. No one holds your hand here. You either deliver or you're out. Katherine swallowed hard, but she nodded. Understood. As they stepped into the open workspace, dozens of employees moved around them with focused determination. Some were glued to their phones, negotiating deals or handling media crises, while others huddled over desks covered in notes, pitching ideas for clients who demanded nothing less than perfection. The energy in the room was electric, and for the first time in years, Katherine felt something stirring inside her. A spark of excitement, of challenge. Nathan led her to a small group gathered around a conference table, deep in discussion over a branding proposal. A tall, blonde man in a crisp button-down shirt glanced up, his eyes narrowing slightly as he took her in. Katherine Hayes. His tone carried something between curiosity and skepticism. Didn't you used to be married to Jonathan Donovan? The word stung, but she refused to let it show. She had expected this. No matter where she went, her past would follow her like a shadow, people recognizing her name not for her accomplishments, but for the man she had been tied to for so long. Lifting her chin slightly, she met his gaze head-on. But I'm here because of my own skills, not my last name. A flicker of surprise crossed his face before he masked it with indifference. The other employees exchanged brief glances, some with mild interest, others clearly too busy to care. But she could feel the weight of their silent judgments, their curiosity about whether she was just another socialite playing pretend or if she actually had what it took to survive in their world. Nathan leaned against the edge of the table, arms crossed. Katherine has a strong background in marketing, and she'll be working with us to refine client strategies. I expect all of you to bring her up to speed. His tone was final, a clear message that whatever opinions they had about her past were irrelevant. The blonde man, whose name Katherine still didn't know, shrugged and leaned back in his chair. All right then, let's see what you've got. Katherine gripped her notepad tightly, taking a deep breath. She had spent years living in Jonathan's shadow, losing herself in a life that had never truly been hers. But this was different. This was her chance to prove to them, to herself, that she wasn't just someone's ex-wife. She was someone worth betting on, and she would make damn sure they knew it. The conference room was sleek and modern, all glass and chrome, designed to impress high-profile clients. But to Katherine, it felt more like a test. A battlefield where every word, every idea, could determine whether she belonged in this world, or if she was just a woman desperately trying to rebuild a life from the ashes of her past. She tightened her grip on her pen, her notepad resting in front of her as the meeting began. Across the table, a dozen eyes flicked between their screens and the documents in front of them, their focus sharp, their presence commanding. These people lived and breathed strategy. They were professionals, and she had to prove that she was one too. Nathan took his place at the head of the table, his expression serious as he tapped a folder against the surface. All right, let's cut to it. Our biggest client, Westfield Luxury, is preparing to launch a new campaign next quarter. We're up against 3 other agencies for this contract, which means we can't afford to play it safe. Whatever we pitch has to be fresh, modern, and, most importantly, better than what anyone else is bringing to the table. A low murmur spread across the room as people flipped through documents and notes, already piecing ideas together. Ethan Parker, the blonde strategist who had questioned her earlier, leaned forward, tossing a file onto the table. We've been studying market shifts, and there's a clear move toward authenticity. Consumers are done with staged perfection. They want brands to feel human, personal. A woman with dark-rimmed glasses, seated 2 chairs down, nodded. Right? If we position Westfield as luxury with authenticity, we could have something powerful. Behind-the-scenes content, real people instead of airbrushed models, storytelling that feels raw instead of curated. Katherine listened carefully, absorbing every word. The conversation moved quickly, bouncing from one idea to the next, each person adding their own angle. This was the kind of rapid-fire collaboration she hadn't been part of in years. And then, just as quickly as the discussion started, it stopped. Nathan turned to her. Katherine, thoughts. The weight of the room shifted. Eyes locked on her. The moment she had been dreading had arrived. She hesitated for just a second before pushing the fear aside. She had been silenced for too long. If she didn't speak now, she never would. She straightened in her chair. Authenticity is definitely the right direction, but we have to be careful. Westfield is still a luxury brand. If we make it too relatable, they risk losing their exclusivity. The key is balance, making the brand feel personal while maintaining its prestige. Ethan arched an eyebrow. And how do you suggest we do that? Katherine flipped to a blank page in her notepad, sketching a quick outline as she spoke. We shift the focus to craftsmanship. We highlight the people behind the brand, the artisans, the designers, the process of creating these products. We make the audience feel connected to the work that goes into every piece, emphasizing personal stories without losing the high-end appeal. The visuals stay sleek, elegant, but the narrative feels human. The room was silent for a moment. Then, Nathan smirked. That's solid. The others exchanged glances. Some nodded in agreement. Others seemed skeptical but intrigued. Katherine's pulse steadied. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed. All right, let's see if you can back it up. I want a concept deck on my desk by tomorrow morning. Tomorrow morning. Less than 24 hours to put together something that would prove she deserved to be here. Katherine's fingers tightened around her pen, but instead of fear, she felt something different, determination. She had spent years living in Jonathan's shadow, but now she was stepping into her own light. The office was nearly empty by the time Katherine settled into a workstation near the large windows. Outside, the city glittered under the night sky, the glow of streetlights stretching endlessly into the horizon. Most of the employees had already gone home, their desks cleared, their chairs neatly tucked in place. But Katherine, she was just getting started. The weight of the assignment pressed against her chest. Less than 24 hours to create a concept deck that would prove she wasn't just Jonathan Donovan's discarded wife. That she wasn't a charity hire. That she belonged here. She took a deep breath and opened a blank presentation on her laptop. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment before she started typing. Craftsmanship, personal stories, prestige without losing authenticity. The ideas swirled in her mind, forming the structure of something real, something compelling. She scribbled notes on a notepad beside her, flipping through branding studies, analyzing Westfield Luxury's past campaigns, searching for what would set them apart. Time passed in a blur. The quiet hum of the office was broken only by the occasional sound of her typing, the rustling of paper, and the faint buzz of the vending machine in the corner. At some point, she removed her blazer and rolled up her sleeves, her body leaning closer to the screen, her mind fully immersed in the work. For the first time in years, she felt like she was creating something of her own. She was so focused that she almost didn't hear the footsteps approaching. Still here, Katherine looked up, startled. Ethan Parker stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. He glanced at her laptop screen, then at the half-empty coffee cup beside her. "You do realize you don't have to pull an all-nighter for this, right?" he said, tilting his head slightly. "No one expects you to perform miracles on day one." Katherine straightened in her chair. "I know, but I need to get this right." Ethan studied her for a moment before pulling out the chair across from her and sitting down. "Let me see what you've got so far." For a second, she hesitated. She wasn't sure if he was here to help or just to measure how much of a threat she actually was. But then she turned the laptop toward him. If she wanted to prove herself, she had to be willing to put her work out there. Ethan scrolled through the slides, his gaze sharp as he took in her ideas. The silence stretched between them, each second feeling longer than the last. Finally, he exhaled. "Not bad." Katherine arched an eyebrow. "Not bad." He smirked. "Better than I expected." She wasn't sure if that was a compliment or an insult, but before she could respond, he leaned back in his chair. "Your approach is solid. But if you want this to really stand out, you need to push harder on the exclusivity angle. Luxury is about making people feel like they're part of something untouchable. Your concept is good, but it needs that final edge." Katherine nodded slowly, processing his words. He was right. Exclusivity wasn't just about quality, it was about desire. The feeling that owning a Westfield piece put you in a league of your own. She grabbed her pen and made a few quick notes. "I can refine it." Ethan gave a small nod, standing up. "Good. Then I'll see what you come up with in the morning." As he walked away, Katherine turned back to her screen, her mind already spinning with ways to enhance her pitch. She had one night, one chance, and she wasn't going to waste it. The first rays of sunlight streamed through the towering windows of the office, casting a golden glow over the empty desks. Katherine sat motionless in front of her laptop, staring at the final version of her presentation. She had worked on it for hours, refining, adjusting, second-guessing every word. Her coffee had gone cold hours ago, but the adrenaline surging through her veins kept her awake. The quiet hum of the city below reminded her that the world was moving forward, and for the first time in years, she felt like she was moving with it. This wasn't about Jonathan. It wasn't about the life she had lost. It was about proving to herself, to everyone, that she could stand on her own. She took a deep breath, straightened her posture, and shut her laptop. No more changes. It was time. By the time employees started filtering into the office, Katherine had freshened up in the restroom, splashed cold water on her face, and gathered her composure. She watched as Ethan, Monica, and the rest of the team made their way to their desks, their conversations filled with morning chatter. None of them had any idea that she had been there all night, working until the last minute to make sure this presentation was perfect. At exactly 9 a.m., Nathan called the team into the conference room. Katherine felt the familiar weight of nerves pressing against her chest as she followed the group inside. The long glass table, the sleek screens mounted on the walls, the quiet tension in the air. It all reminded her of the boardrooms she had sat in as Jonathan's wife. But today, she was here for herself. Nathan took his seat at the head of the table, flipping through a few papers before glancing up. "All right, let's hear it. Katherine, you're up." She exhaled slowly, stood, and stepped toward the screen at the front of the room. She clicked to the first slide, feeling the weight of every set of eyes on her. No hesitation, no second-guessing. Westfield Luxury isn't just about selling products. It's about selling a legacy, a lifestyle, an experience. The room was silent as she moved through the slides, her voice growing stronger with each word. She outlined the core of her strategy, blending exclusivity with authenticity. She explained how Westfield could showcase its heritage without losing its aspirational allure, how the brand could give customers a sense of intimacy while maintaining its high-end appeal. She gestured to a slide showing an elegant black and white image of an artisan at work. "We shift the narrative. We don't just show the final product, we show the hands that create it. We make the process part of the luxury." She caught Ethan's gaze as she spoke, his expression unreadable. Monica was nodding slightly, tapping her pen against her notepad. Nathan leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. By the time she reached her final slide, her pulse was steady, her breath controlled. This campaign doesn't just sell fashion. It sells craftsmanship. It sells prestige. And most importantly, it sells a story that people want to be part of. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then Nathan spoke. "That's strong." A flicker of pride shot through her. Monica glanced at the slides again. "It's smart. It gives Westfield an edge without compromising its exclusivity." Ethan, still studying her, finally smirked. "Better than I expected." Katherine didn't know whether to take that as a compliment or an insult, but she didn't care. She had done it. Nathan nodded. "All right, let's refine it and get ready for the client pitch." As the meeting wrapped up, Katherine felt exhaustion settle into her bones. But beneath it, something else burned. She was no longer just the woman Jonathan left behind. She was someone to be reckoned with. The city stretched out before her, a sea of shimmering lights against the encroaching twilight. From her vantage point near the massive windows of Halston and Moore PR, Katherine could see the world moving. Cars honking, people rushing down the sidewalks, neon signs flickering on as the night awoke. It was a scene she had watched countless times before from the back seat of a luxury car, beside a man who had once dictated the course of her life. But this time, she wasn't watching from behind tinted glass. She was standing on her own. The weight of the past week settled into her bones. The late nights, the exhaustion, the pressure to prove herself. But today, all of it had paid off. The Westfield luxury pitch had been a success. She could still hear Nathan's voice in the conference room that morning, delivering the final slides of her strategy to the client's executive team. She had studied their faces as he spoke, searching for signs. A frown, a disapproving shake of the head, any hesitation. Instead, she had seen curiosity, interest, and then, finally, certainty. And then came the words that had changed everything. "We're moving forward with Halston and Moore." The moment they had spoken those words, a rush of disbelief had washed over her. Not because she hadn't believed in the work she had, but because, for the first time in a long time, she had accomplished something that was hers. No Jonathan, no mansion, no high society connections smoothing the way, just her. She had come into this company as an outsider. People had doubted her. They had whispered about her past, about the husband who had thrown her away and the privileged life she had lost. And now, she had just secured the biggest account of the quarter. The thought sent a slow wave of pride through her, but it was something else too, freedom. For the first time since Jonathan had left, she wasn't clinging to the past. She wasn't surviving off old memories, measuring her worth by what she had lost. She was building something new. Not bad, Hayes. The familiar voice pulled her from her thoughts. She turned to see Ethan Parker, leaning casually against the doorframe, arms crossed. The usual smirk played at his lips, but there was something different in his eyes tonight. Katherine arched an eyebrow. That's starting to sound dangerously close to a compliment. Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. Don't get used to it, but there was no bite to his words this time. Just a quiet acknowledgement. A sign that maybe, just maybe, she had earned his respect. Before Ella Pudes responder, Nathan appeared behind Ethan, clapping his hands together. All right, everyone, you know the drill. We just landed the biggest client of the quarter, and that means one thing, drinks at the Copper Lounge. No excuses. A ripple of excitement moved through the office. Jackets were grabbed, last-minute emails were sent, and within moments, the space that had been filled with tension just hours ago was now buzzing with celebration. Katherine hesitated for only a second. A week ago, she would have wondered if she belonged here, if she had the right to stand among these people to claim her place. But not anymore. She met Ethan's gaze one last time before grabbing her coat and smiling. I'll be there. As she stepped out into the cool night air, the city stretched before her like an open road, shimmering with endless possibilities. For the first time in years, she wasn't looking back. She was moving forward.